He smirked, thinking he'd cornered me, his voice echoing off the glass walls. But while he read the document like a threat, I read it like a trap. One clause, one line, my clause. The office lights hummed above me like a swarm of mechanical insects, white and cold, casting long, sterile shadows on the conference table. I sat there, spine straight, hands clasped, a polite smile stretched across my lips like lacquer, impenetrable and glossy. Across from me, Marcus Heller leaned back in his leather chair, flipping through the stapled document with the kind of leisurely menace you'd expect from a cat pawing at its prey. He didn't know, not yet. "Looks clean," he muttered without looking up. His voice carried that casual arrogance that came from sitting too long at the head of a table he didn't build. "Standard NDA, indemnity clause, legal cost transfers. Wait, what's this?" He paused on page 9. Microcliff. I let my silence wrap around him like velvet rope. It had taken me 3 weeks to craft that paragraph, buried under boilerplate indemnities and signature lines most execs never read past. But I knew Marcus. I knew he'd skim, not scan. And more importantly, I knew he'd sign. I tilted my head. "Something unclear?" He narrowed his eyes. "You included clause 14B? That wasn't in the version from legal." I smiled. "It is now." He flipped back, confused. "This section says the company assumes full legal defense liability for external claims if the employee acted in good faith and followed internal reporting protocols." "Which I did," I interrupted smoothly. "Every report, every flagged discrepancy. HR, compliance, and your own assistant were copied." His fingers twitched slightly. His mouth moved like it wanted to form a rebuttal, but couldn't settle on a shape. The conference room's silence stretched wide. Beyond the glass, the Monday chaos of open-plan cubicles buzzed on. Emails flying, phones ringing, someone swearing under their breath at a broken Excel macro. But in here, it was just me, him, and the sound of the trap closing. "You think this will hold up?" he scoffed finally. "Oh, I don't think," I said, sliding a printed email across the table. "I know." The email was time-stamped, signed, and contained the magic word, "Acknowledged legal gold." He swallowed. For the first time, the edge in his posture dulled. He leaned forward, looking at me like he was seeing someone entirely new. But I hadn't changed. He had just never looked closely. Outside, someone called for an emergency Zoom in room C. Inside, Marcus was slowly realizing this wasn't a meeting. It was a reckoning, and the signature he'd just added, it might as well have been his own check, payable to the person he tried to intimidate. "You think a single clause can't change everything? Wait until you see what's on the next page." Marcus didn't speak, not right away. He just stared at the document like it had grown teeth. I could see it, the way realization traveled through him. First, confusion. Then, the cold flicker of fear behind his eyes. And finally, something I'd been waiting to taste. The bitter pinch of recognition. He knew what Clause 14B meant now. He just didn't know how deep it ran. "I'll have legal review this," he muttered, already reaching for his phone. I raised my brow. "You mean the same legal department that signed off 2 weeks ago? Or the new guy from compliance who flagged the accounting discrepancies I reported and got mysteriously reassigned?" That stopped him. A new tension coiled in the room, like the air itself had grown thick with static, dangerous, humming, ready to spark. Marcus placed his phone down, slowly. "Why didn't you bring this up earlier?" "Because earlier, I didn't need protection." I leaned forward, voice steady. "But now that you've weaponized HR, revoked my project access, and sent veiled threats via Slack, I figured it was time to make sure the weapon pointed both ways." He scoffed, but there was no force behind it. You think this little trick saves you? No, Marcus. I tapped the signature line again. It doesn't save me. It binds you. Microcliff. 3 weeks ago, it started with a whisper, a rumor in the hallway, that I'd missed a budget item, that procurement flagged my report, that my name was on the internal audit list. None of it true. But when those whispers come from someone like Marcus, they don't need to be. They grow, like mold. Then came the surprise performance review. A Zoom call with HR, 2 levels above my actual manager. No camera, scripted questions, and the NDA reference slipped in like a blade under the ribs. You understand this is confidential, they said, as if I was the one with secrets. But I didn't flinch. I signed, I recorded, and I read every line. That's when I found it, the loophole, nestled between jargon about arbitration and mutual respect. A line Marcus had carelessly copied from an old vendor contract. It was meant to cover outsourced counsel. But with a single word changed, it did something else entirely. It obligated the company, him, to cover my legal costs if I was retaliated against after making a good faith report. And I had receipts, emails, time-stamped spreadsheets, Slack logs, even a flagged budget line that finance confirmed. Right before someone deleted it, Microcliff. I stood up, smoothing my blazer-like armor. So, here's how this goes. You walk away from your vendetta. You stop the whisper campaign. Or I let my counsel do what they're now legally entitled to do, on the company's dime. You wouldn't, he said, but it came out more like a plea than a threat. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The silence did the talking. Because when you build a cage for someone else, you better make sure the door doesn't swing both ways. You think this was the twist? You haven't seen the fallback clause I buried deeper. If you caught the twist, imagine what's still hidden. Follow to see how deep the contract goes. Marcus didn't show up at the 9 a.m. strategy call. Odd, considering it was his idea. The entire exec team sat on Zoom, waiting, the screen filled with frozen smiles and hollow banter about Q3 projections and synergy. I watched them all, silently sipping my coffee, the taste sharp and dark, like my mood. No one knew yet, but they would. At 9:07, his assistant dropped a note in the meeting chat. Marcus won't be joining, last-minute conflict. Translation? He was scrambling. Good, I unmuted. In that case, I'd like to propose an adjustment to the resource allocation for legal review. People looked up. Surprise flickered in a few eyes. I never spoke in these meetings, not unless directly asked. Based on flagged items from last quarter, I've compiled documentation regarding procedural inconsistencies. Some of it touches Marcus's division, so I've looped in compliance and filed an internal report. I'll circulate the memo post-call. I could feel the ripples move across the Zoom tiles. Some faces froze, others blinked, stunned. One VP nodded slowly, trying not to look impressed or implicated. This wasn't just a statement, it was a line in the sand. 2 tiles over, the GC, a woman named Nadia who didn't play favorites, gave the smallest of nods, barely a twitch, but I caught it. That's when I knew I wasn't alone anymore. Microcliff. By 11 a.m., the ping came in. New. Legal coverage. Confirmed? Clause 14. B. Applies. Subject line like thunder. I read it twice, 3 times. The firm was on notice. I had full legal backing. Retroactive. Immediate. That meant Marcus couldn't touch me, not without triggering breach. And if he pushed, he'd pay for both sides. My lawyer, Camille, sent a follow-up. We're green. Sit tight. Let the process do the slicing. There was something almost surgical in that phrasing. I liked Camille. At 12:03, HR pinged me. Quick chat? I walked into the glass box meeting room like it was a stage. They'd prepped a softly threatening agenda, laminated and smiley. "We're just trying to get clarity on some things," they said. I handed them a printout of their own time-stamped policy, highlighted where it aligned with my clause. Then, I laid down the attached Slack threads, the revoked tool access, and the deleted project history. And finally, I dropped the email Marcus had sent me 3 weeks ago, the one with the friendly warning. Their eyes didn't move, but their faces did. HR blinked first. "We may need to escalate this." "Yes," I said. "To the board." Microcliff. Walking out, I passed the legal floor. Behind one glass wall, Marcus stood with 2 junior attorneys, red-faced, gesturing at a screen. His tie was loose, his confidence frayed. He looked up. Our eyes met. And in that moment, he knew I'd already won something. Not the case, the leverage. By the time Thursday arrived, the office had changed temperature. Not physically, but in spirit. People spoke softer. Doors stayed closed longer. Even the printer seemed to hum more nervously. You don't need sirens to know a storm's coming when everyone starts whispering indoors. I walked past the kitchenette where once Marcus's voice would boom over casual jokes and humble brags. Now, only the coffee machine dared to hiss. That morning, a calendar invite landed like a pebble thrown into a lake. Subject: follow-up, indemnity discrepancy, review panel. Attendees: me, Camille, my lawyer, Nadia, GC, 2 board members, and, yes, Marcus, Microcliff. He had to sit across from me now, on record, with every breath monitored and every sentence legally binding. That's the thing about indemnity clauses. Once triggered, they don't just protect, they expose, especially when the company's money is on the line. Camille was calm, clinical. She dressed in monochrome, but wielded words like scalpels. Marcus tried to speak first, but was politely interrupted by one of the board members. "We're here to discuss the legal obligations activated under Clause 14B due to actions potentially violating internal protocol and retaliation policies." Marcus froze. He hadn't seen the shift yet. This wasn't just about a report. It was now about reputation, and he was hemorrhaging it. I pulled out the same document he once waved in my face. I tapped the signature line, the one he'd signed in a hurry, trying to make a point. Now, it made mine. The panel reviewed. Quietly, carefully. Every page turned felt like a countdown. Microcliff. Halfway through, Nadia asked Marcus directly, "Did you read the final draft before signing?" He started with, "Well, I trusted," but never finished the sentence. Because trust, when weaponized, always leaves fingerprints. I leaned in. Clause 14. B wasn't hidden, it was italicized. You just didn't think it mattered. He looked down. His silence was louder than any denial. The panel ended with no conclusions, officially. But as we stood to leave, Nadia nodded again. Once, measured, decisive. Outside, Camille smiled, her voice low as we walked toward the elevators. "He's going to settle. He just doesn't know it yet." The Friday after the panel, Marcus called in sick. It was the first time in 6 years his name didn't light up the 8:30 a.m. Zoom. No blazer, no smug opening quip about efficiency or ownership. Just silence and a subtle tremor in the hierarchy he once ruled. By noon, word had spread. Not publicly, not officially. But the way whispers carried from the legal floor to operations, from finance to HR, was surgical in its own way. I walked past his office. The blinds were drawn for the first time, a ghost behind glass. That's when I saw it. The printed version of the document, still lying on his desk, folded at the corner, highlighted in 3 places, 2 irrelevant, 1 fatal. Clause 14, B, mid-sentence, his own pen stroke across it. Microcliff. At 2:17 p.m., I got the email from legal. You're cleared to proceed with external counsel communication. CC. Nadia, Camille, HR lead. Translation: the company now officially recognized what I had been trying to prove all along: retaliation, mishandling of internal complaints, and a binding indemnity clause that turned their silence into obligation, a silence they could no longer afford. Camille responded within minutes, looping in her firm's reputation counsel. Not aggressive, not loud, just methodical, like a scalpel slicing precisely where infection lives. Meanwhile, I did the one thing no one expected. I worked. I finalized Q4 forecasts, polished the overdue procurement brief, cleaned up the NDA registry Marcus had accidentally left misfiled months ago. Because in war, routine is its own defiance. Microcliff. At 4:39 p.m., a Slack notification buzzed. New: Marcus H. has been removed from this workspace. No announcement, no explanation, just absence. The kind that speaks louder than exit interviews. But I didn't smile. Not yet. Because the story wasn't over. The damage had already been done. To my name, my work, my mental health. He'd burned a lot before I found the fire extinguisher. But now, I held the invoice for the smoke. The following Monday was unnaturally quiet. Not the usual kind of office hush, the kind that comes with focus or early meetings, but the weighty, fragile stillness of people pretending not to look, not to ask, not to say what everyone already knew. Marcus's office had been wiped, literally. The nameplate? Gone. His custom chair? Replaced? Even the obnoxious acrylic hustle harder block was missing from the bookshelf. HR never made a statement, and no one dared to volunteer their voice to fill the void. But the message was clear. The kingdom had no king. Microcliff. I returned to my desk to find a sealed envelope waiting. No name on the front, no note. Just a single line printed on thick, cream paper inside. We believe it's time we talk long-term. It was from the board. Camille was already looped in, of course. She warned me not to react, not yet. This is when people start smiling too wide, she said. They're not congratulating you, they're negotiating with the fire alarm. Still, I met with them. Not in the boardroom, but in a neutral corner of the 20th floor lounge, where the skyline made everyone feel small and civilized. They opened with charm, small talk, and cappuccinos. Then came the soft offer. Would you consider a transition role, an advisory post? We see potential. I listened. Then I laid down my terms, not petty ones, not emotional, but precise. Restoration of title, public acknowledgement of the internal failure, and something else, something deeper, a rewritten clause in every employee NDA going forward, making protection explicit, not hidden in legal fog. The pause that followed was long, uncomfortable, powerful, microcliff, because they realized I wasn't just building a parachute. I was building a bridge, so no one else would have to leap through fire without one. They said they'd review internally. I said I'd wait. Not long, just until the fiscal closes. Because now, time worked for me. 2 weeks passed, and the company moved like someone trying not to wake a sleeping giant. Every department operated half a breath slower. HR adopted a new tone. Legal sent out a memo reminding all managers of policy alignment and documentation protocols. Suddenly, people remembered how to BCC. But the biggest shift? People started looking at me differently, not as the troublemaker Marcus had tried to paint, but as the mirror they were afraid to look into. I wasn't loud, I didn't grandstand, I just walked the halls with calm eyes and straight posture. And when someone passed me in the corridor with a clipboard or a nervous smile, they'd often say the same thing. "Hey, thanks, Microcliff." I didn't ask why. I already knew. They'd all felt it, some version of it. The push, the email with no subject line, the review that smelled off, the Zoom where the silence wasn't about audio issues. It was strategic. And now they saw a different kind of power. Not the loud kind that hoards corner offices, but the quiet kind that builds exit doors in the fine print. Nadia called me up to her office one afternoon. "Off the record," she said. "Your clause, it's being adopted, not just for you. All future templates, full transparency, defense coverage, no loopholes. You caused a shift." I blinked, not because I was surprised, but because someone had finally said it out loud. "It's overdue," I said. She nodded. "And internal comms will draft an announcement next week. Clean, professional, no names, but the message will be clear." I nodded back. "Make sure it's more than clear. Make it impossible to miss." Microcliff. As I walked out, Camille texted just one word. "Settled. No numbers, no drama, just a verdict." I stood by the elevator, watching the floors light up in slow sequence, and I felt it. Not victory, not even relief, but reclamation of story, of dignity, of the right to walk back through fire and not have to explain the burns. By the time the internal announcement went out, it read like a manifesto, disguised in corporate politeness. "We're updating our employee protection protocols to ensure a more transparent, safe, and accountable environment. Effective immediately, all new contracts will include expanded indemnity clauses and clearly stated legal defense rights for employees acting in good faith. No names, no events. But every person who'd been watching knew exactly what sparked it. Slack lit up like a quiet rebellion. Emojis on the post exploded. Someone even dropped a silent thank you in the general channel. Sometimes all it takes is one pen stroke. No one replied. No one had to. Microcliff. In the weeks that followed, I noticed a strange ripple effect. People started revisiting their contracts. Junior analysts asked questions. Mid-level managers requested policy walkthroughs, just for clarity. HR launched a webinar on internal rights. The culture was shifting, and the foundation? Clause 14. B. But I wasn't clinging to it anymore. I didn't need to. That clause had served its purpose. It wasn't a shield now. It was a blueprint. One afternoon, Camille invited me to a quiet dinner. She was heading into a new partnership and wanted to toast the win. "You do realize," she said between sips of wine, "what you pulled off wasn't just legal. It was literary." I smiled. "Funny? He thought he was writing my ending." She leaned in. "But you were editing his the whole time." Microcliff. As we left the restaurant, a warm wind curled around the city, soft, electric, full of unseen potential. And for the first time in months, I didn't feel like I was bracing for something. I felt ready for whatever came next. Spring crept in quietly, with sun-flooded mornings and windows cracked open, just enough to let possibility in. It had been nearly 3 months since the panel, since Marcus, since Clause 14b became more than a lifeline. It became a legend. But legends, like policies, evolve. I now sat in a new office, smaller than Marcus's had been, but cleaner. Glass shelves, fresh orchids, and a single frame behind me. The clause itself, printed on parchment paper, framed in gold, the signature line untouched. A reminder, not of revenge, but of resolve. Microcliff. I was no longer just that person who lawyered up. I'd become something else something more subversive and sacred in corporate culture. Trusted. People came to me with documents, questions, fears, quietly, carefully. A marketing lead slipped me a draft of a shady bonus clawback clause. A developer flagged a manager who strongly suggested silence about an accessibility flaw. I didn't give advice. I wasn't HR. But I showed them where to read, and that was enough. Microcliff. One day, Nadia stopped by. No meeting, no pretext, just a knock and a glance at the framed clause. "Do you know," she said, "legals started referring to this thing as the parachute line?" I laughed. "Better than noose clause." She tilted her head. "We're rolling out a version of it globally. Latin America first, then Europe, quietly." "And internally?" I asked. Her smile was faint but real. "Already in motion." The elevator dinged somewhere down the hall. Nadia stood, about to leave, then turned back. "You didn't just win, you rewrote the rules. Most people burn out. You lit the policy manual," I offered. She nodded. "Exactly." Microcliff. As she walked away, I looked down at my inbox. A new message blinked from an unfamiliar address. Subject: interested in helping us rebuild? It was from a former exec at another firm. One where I'd heard whispers, similar patterns, same power games. And just like that, I knew. This wasn't the end. It was a beginning written in the margins. The office was quieter now, not the silence of fear, but of focus, of people working without looking over their shoulders, of Slack messages that didn't need to be reread 3 times before hitting send, of meetings that started on time and ended with clarity, not confusion. Peace had returned, but it wasn't passive. It had been earned. My framed claws still hung behind me, but it no longer felt like armor. It felt like history. That afternoon, I stepped into the studio where the company filmed its new onboarding videos. HR had asked me to record a brief segment on employee rights and trust. Funny, months ago, they barely made eye contact. Now, they handed me the mic, Microcliff. I stood under the soft ring of lights, the camera blinking red, and spoke plainly. Sometimes the most powerful thing in your career isn't your resume. It's the clause you read that no one else does. Learn the contracts. Understand your rights, and remember, silence isn't compliance. The camera operator blinked, then smiled. "That was badass," he whispered. I smiled back, but said nothing. I didn't need to. Outside, a new cohort of hires walked through the glass doors, glossy ID badges swinging, eyes wide with potential. One of them stopped by my door on a lunch break. "You're the one from the clause story, right?" I raised an eyebrow. "Which clause?" She grinned. "The one that changed everything." I paused, then nodded. "Well," I said, tapping the edge of my monitor, "read the fine print. It's where the plot twist lives." She laughed and walked off, but I saw it in her gait, the new weight in her steps. Not fear, awareness, Microcliff. Back at my desk, I opened that message from the exec again, the offer to help rebuild, to reshape a new kind of workplace culture, to be part of something bigger than defense, a blueprint for something better. I clicked reply, and this time there was no hesitation, no signature line to fear, only space to write the next clause, on my terms.